Imagine being the daughter of a billionaire, living in wealth, beauty, and privilege. Then one night, everything changes. You're dragged into the dark forest by the most feared kidnapper in the land. No one dares speak his name. Mothers hush their children when they hear his footsteps. He is a ghost to the police, yet flesh and blood to his victims. Lavara State sparkled at night. From the towering skyscrapers to the neon lights dancing across the lagoon, it was a city that never slept, a city where billionaires played and the poor survived. For Bank Day Wood, the 24-year-old daughter of Chief Day Wood, the oil magnate, life was silk and gold. She had never known hunger, never known fear, never even stepped on a public bus. But fear has a way of sneaking into even the most protected palaces. And on that fateful night, it came like a shadow that swallowed everything she thought was safe. The night began with laughter. Bank had just returned from her best friend's birthday party. Her driver pulled the black Lexus into the vast compound of the Daywood mansion. The gates shut with the usual heavy thud. Security guards moved lazily around, their torches flickering. Nothing seemed unusual, until she stepped out of the car. It happened too fast. A blur of black masks. Boots crunching against gravel. Gunshots that split the night into pieces. "Down! Down!" one of the guards screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the sharp crack of rifles. In less than a minute, silence fell, a silence broken only by Bank's terrified breathing. A rough hand grabbed her from behind. A cloth was yanked over her face. She struggled, screamed, kicked, but it was useless. The last thing she heard before the world went dark was a voice. Deep, steady, like gravel grinding against metal. "Move! We have what we came for." When she woke, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and smoke. Her hands were tied. Her legs, too. She was lying on the cold floor of what looked like an abandoned hut. Her heart thudded so loudly she thought it might burst. Her eyes darted around. Shadows moved. Men sat on broken stools, smoking, their guns leaning carelessly against the wall. One of them saw her stir and smirked. "The princess is awake." Laughter followed. Cruel. Mocking. And then he entered. The others straightened instantly, their laughter swallowed in silence. He was tall, broad, with shoulders that filled the doorway. A long scar cut across his cheek, like a river carved by pain. His eyes were sharp, piercing, as if they could read every hidden thought. He wore no mask. He didn't need one. His presence was mask enough. Bank's breath caught. She had heard of him. Everyone in Lavara had. Gideon Kane. The Phantom. Children whispered his name at night. Mothers hushed their little ones with it. The police had chased him for years, but he slipped through their fingers like smoke. He was a legend of fear. Now he was standing over her. "Daughter of Chief Day Wood," he said slowly, each word heavy, deliberate. "You're worth more than gold. Your father will pay. Until then, you belong here." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that crushed the room. Bank's lips trembled. "Please, don't hurt me." Something flickered in his eyes, something she couldn't read. He turned away without answering, motioning to his men. "Make sure she eats. She's no good to us dead." The men muttered in surprise. It wasn't the order they expected. That night, Bank couldn't sleep. She curled in a corner, the rope biting her wrists, tears burning her cheeks. Every creak of the wooden walls made her flinch. She thought of her father, her mother, her brothers. Were they looking for her? Were they afraid? Would she ever see them again? But what haunted her most was him. Gideon Kane. The way he looked at her. Not with lust. Not even with hatred. Something else. A storm she couldn't name. She closed her eyes and prayed. The next morning, when a bowl of Gary and cold beans was placed before her, Bank shook her head. "I can't eat this." One of the men snarled. "Spoiled brat. You'll eat what you're given." Before he could finish, Gideon's voice thundered across the room. "Enough." The man froze. Gideon walked over, his boots striking the floor like drumbeats. He crouched in front of Bank, his scarred face inches from hers. "Eat," he said quietly. You'll need your strength. Bank stared into his eyes. For the first time, she noticed something strange. Beneath the hardness, beneath the shadow of cruelty, was a flicker. A flicker that didn't match the monster everyone described. But she looked away. Because she knew one truth. Monsters could wear masks, too. That night, she heard two of the men whispering outside. Boss is acting strange, one said. The girl should have been handled by now. Another spat. Don't say it too loud. You know what happens to those who question him. Their words made Bank's chest tighten. She didn't know what was worse, being left to the cruelty of those men, or being trapped under the gaze of the man they all feared. And yet, when she lay down again, her mind replayed the way Gideon had spoken to her. Not harsh, not soft, but almost human. She shook her head, burying her face in her knees. This was madness. This was captivity. He was her captor. She was his hostage. Nothing more. Still, in the dark silence of Lavara Forest, a single thought slipped into her heart like a forbidden seed. Why does the phantom look at me like that? The second night in captivity was worse than the first. Bank sat in the corner of the dimly lit hut, her back pressed against the rough wooden wall. Every sound, the chirping crickets, the rustling leaves outside, the occasional burst of laughter from the kidnappers, stabbed at her nerves. Her body was weary, but her mind refused to rest. And always, she felt his presence. Gideon Kane didn't talk much. He wasn't like his men, who cursed, laughed loudly, and argued about money and women. He sat apart, sharpening his knife, his scarred face half in shadow. When he moved, the others fell silent. When he spoke, they obeyed without hesitation. But what unsettled Bank most wasn't his power. It was his eyes. Each time their gazes met, she felt as if he was searching her soul. Not in the way a predator hunts prey, but like a man reading a language only he understood. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to look away. But she couldn't. The third morning, an incident shattered the fragile silence. One of the younger gang members, a hot-tempered man with a crooked smile, swaggered toward Bank with a plate of food. He placed it in front of her, then crouched too close. You think you're better than us, don't you, fine girl? He sneered. You're nothing here. Nothing. Bank turned her face away, her lips trembling. He chuckled darkly. Maybe I should teach you how things work in the bush. Billionaire's daughter or not. Before he could finish, Gideon was there. It happened so fast that Bank gasped. One moment the man was crouched near her. The next, Gideon's hand was around his throat, lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. Did I not warn you? Gideon's voice was low, deadly calm. The man choked, his legs kicking helplessly. Gideon's eyes burned with a fury that froze every soul in the room. Then, just as quickly, he dropped him to the ground like discarded trash. If you ever touch her, Gideon growled, his voice echoing like thunder in the small space, you'll beg for death before I'm done with you. The hut fell silent. No one dared breathe. The young man crawled away, clutching his throat, eyes wide with terror. And Gideon turned back to Bank. For a moment, the fearsome phantom looked almost human. His chest rose and fell, his eyes softer now. He bent down, picked up the food, and set it before her. Eat, he said quietly. No one will harm you. Bank's heart pounded. She wanted to scream. You are harming me. You kidnapped me. But the words wouldn't come. Because in that moment, she wasn't looking at a monster. She was looking at a man who had just defended her. That night, Bank couldn't stop thinking. Why would a kidnapper protect his hostage? Why would a man feared by the entire state show her kindness? It didn't make sense. Monsters weren't supposed to care. Criminals weren't supposed to shield. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw his scarred face hovering above hers, his voice echoing, No one will harm you. She hated that her heart stirred. She hated that her fear was slowly cracking into something more dangerous. Curiosity. The following day, as the sun dipped low and painted the forest in shades of gold, Bank found herself doing something unthinkable. She spoke to him. Why do they call you the Phantom?" The men looked up, shocked that she dared speak. But Gideon didn't answer immediately. He sat sharpening his blade, his expression unreadable. Finally, without looking at her, he said, "Because the law can't catch what it cannot see." "That's not an answer," she whispered. His eyes flicked to hers, sharp and piercing. For a moment, Bank regretted speaking. But then his gaze softened, just slightly. "It's the only one you'll get for now." For now. The words lingered, curling around her thoughts like smoke. That evening, as darkness fell, Gideon stepped outside to speak with his men. Bank sat alone, her arms wrapped around her knees. She could hear their voices through the thin walls. "We can't keep her too long," one of them hissed. "Her father has already offered money. Let's take it and leave before the army finds us." But Gideon's voice cut through the night, calm and steady. "We move when I say. Not before." "But boss." "You heard me." Silence. His authority was unquestionable. Bank's chest tightened. He was keeping her here not just for money. She didn't know why, but she knew there was something deeper, something he wasn't saying. And though she told herself it was madness, her heart whispered a truth she didn't want to accept. She wanted to know more about him. That night, as she lay on the floor, Gideon passed by. For the first time, she dared to whisper, "Why me?" He stopped, his shadow falling over her. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, in a voice so low she almost missed it, he said, "Because you're not like the others." Her heart thudded. She opened her mouth to ask more, but he was gone, swallowed by the night. And Bank, bound in ropes and fear, realized something terrifying. The Phantom's eyes were no longer just haunting her. They were beginning to pull her in. The days in captivity were blurring together. Morning bled into night, night into morning, until Bank could no longer count how long she had been in the Phantom's lair. At first, her heart had been ruled by terror. She had expected torture, cruelty, the kind of violence whispered about in the streets of Lavara. But instead, something else unfolded, something she had not expected. It began with conversations. One evening, when the other men had gone to fetch supplies, Bank sat staring at the crackling fire. Her wrists were still bound, but loosely now. Gideon sat across from her, sharpening his machete with slow, deliberate strokes. Bank swallowed her fear and whispered, "Do you ever sleep?" The rasp of steel on stone stopped. Gideon lifted his gaze, his eyes catching the firelight. "Sleep is for those who have peace." His words struck her. She hesitated, then asked, "And you, don't have peace?" A shadow passed over his face. He returned to sharpening the blade. "Peace was stolen from me a long time ago." Bank leaned forward despite herself. "Who stole it?" This time, his eyes lingered on hers longer. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Poverty. Corruption. The kind of world that watches your sister die because you can't pay for a hospital bed." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected him to answer. "She was 12, he continued, his voice like gravel scraping stone. Bright eyes. Always laughing. One night, she got sick. I carried her on my back for miles. The doctor looked at me, saw I had no money, and turned us away. She died in my arms before morning." Bank's chest tightened. For the first time, she saw not a criminal, but a brother broken by grief. "I swore," Gideon said, his jaw tightening, "that I would never be powerless again. If the world wanted a monster, I would become one. And here I am." The fire popped. Bank blinked back tears. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in her throat. At last, she whispered, "I'm sorry." Gideon looked at her, and for a heartbeat, his eyes softened, not with pity, not with cruelty, but with something else. Something dangerously close to humanity. The next day, Bank found herself waiting for his footsteps. It terrified her. Every time she heard his boots approach, her heart would pound. Not with fear this time, but with something she couldn't name. When he spoke, she listened. When he was silent, She found herself wanting to fill the silence. "Do you regret it?" she asked him once, when the camp was quiet. "Regret what?" he replied. "Becoming this?" Gideon's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he sighed. "Every day. But regrets don't change reality. Money does. Power does." "Is that why you kidnapped me?" she asked softly. He didn't flinch. "Your father built his empire on the blood of the poor. Men like him create men like me. He'll pay, and I'll take what the world denied me." His words stung, but they carried a truth Bank could not deny. She knew her father's wealth wasn't spotless. She had heard whispers, seen shadows in the halls of power. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps she was paying for sins that weren't hers. And yet, she didn't hate Gideon for saying it. Instead, she felt an ache, not of anger, but of understanding. That night, when she lay on the wooden floor, she found herself whispering into the darkness. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" A pause. Then his deep voice from the shadows. "Every second of my life." Bank closed her eyes, her heart thudding. For reasons she could not explain, she wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, to ease the storm she heard in his voice. But she didn't. Not yet. Over the next few days, the shift became undeniable. He gave her water before anyone else. He ensured her food was warm, even if his own went cold. He stopped tying her hands at night. And though he never smiled, his eyes sometimes lingered on her face, longer than before. And Bank, against all reason, against all logic, began to feel something dangerous. She caught herself waiting for him. She caught herself thinking of his voice when he wasn't near. She caught herself imagining what he looked like before the scar-carved pain across his face. It was madness. He was her captor. He was the phantom, the terror of Lavara. She should hate him. She should pray for escape. Yet when she closed her eyes, she heard only his voice. "Peace was stolen from me." And in the quiet corners of her heart, a fragile seed of empathy began to grow. The seed of a captive's heart, reaching out to the man who chained it. The forest had its own clock. The sun rose in golden slants through the tall trees, and when it set, shadows swallowed the camp whole. For Bank, days passed not by time, but by moments with Gideon Kane. It was strange, dangerous, and maddening. Every word he spoke was measured, but she had begun to read the pauses between them, to see the weight he carried in his silence. Every time his eyes lingered on her, her chest tightened. But others had begun to notice too. One evening, as the men gathered to share palm wine, Bank heard them whispering. "Have you seen the boss lately?" one muttered. "The way he looks at the girl?" Another laughed bitterly. "The phantom, falling for a hostage? That's madness." "Madness or not," the first man hissed, "if she becomes his weakness, we're all finished." Their words chilled Bank. She pretended not to hear, but her heart raced. If the men suspected, what would they do? That night, the unease boiled over. Bank was sitting near the fire, the ropes on her wrists now little more than a formality. Gideon was cleaning his rifle when one of the younger men, the same one Gideon had once nearly strangled, stepped toward her again. "Boss is soft," he sneered. "But I'm not. You're just a spoiled princess, and when this is over, I'll—" His words cut off in a cry as Gideon was on him, faster than anyone could blink. A single punch sent the man sprawling in the dirt, coughing blood. Gideon's voice was thunder. "I said she is not to be touched." The others fell silent. The fire crackled between them, sparks flying. No one dared move. Gideon turned to Bank. His eyes, fierce a moment ago, softened when they met hers. He crouched beside her, his hand hovering near her arm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low. Bank shook her head, though her heart was racing. "No." For a moment, their eyes locked. His hand, calloused and strong, brushed against her wrist as he adjusted the rope. It was the lightest touch, but it sent a shiver through her entire body. And when he untied the knot completely, letting the rope fall to the ground, her breath caught. "You trust me," she whispered. Gideon's jaw tightened. "No." But I trust myself to protect you. Bank stared at him, her mind a storm. Why was he doing this? Why was he protecting her, feeding her, freeing her? He was her captor, yet she no longer felt like a prisoner when his eyes were on her. That night, as she lay on the wooden floor, she couldn't sleep. Gideon sat by the fire, his silhouette outlined by the orange glow. Without thinking, she whispered into the darkness. "Gideon!" He looked up, surprised she had said his name. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Why are you different with me?" For a long time, he didn't answer. Then he rose, walked toward her, and crouched down. His hand brushed hers again, this time deliberately. "Because," he said in a voice so quiet only she could hear, "for the first time in my life, someone sees me. Not the phantom. Not the monster. Just me." Her heart stuttered. The fire cracked between them. His eyes, stormy and broken, searched hers as if begging for something he couldn't name. And Bank, trembling, made a choice she didn't understand. She turned her palm upward and let her fingers curl into his. The contact was brief. His hand was rough, scarred. Hers, soft and trembling. But in that single touch, the air around them changed. It was no longer captor and captive. It was no longer monster and prey. It was man and woman, bound by something neither could resist. The next day, Bank caught herself doing the unthinkable. When Gideon left to check the perimeter, she almost tried to escape. Almost. She saw the path leading deeper into the forest. She could have run. But her feet didn't move. Instead, she sat back down, her chest heaving. Why? Why didn't she run? The answer scared her more than the ropes ever did, because a part of her didn't want to leave him. Later, when he returned, their eyes met across the camp. She knew he could see it, the change in her. She knew he felt it too. And when one of his men muttered angrily, "She's becoming a problem," Gideon's glare silenced him instantly. Bank's heart hammered. She was no longer just a hostage. She was something more, something dangerous. A dangerous bond had formed, and it would change everything. The forest was quieter than usual that night. The men had gone to rest, their snores filling the still air, leaving only the chirping of crickets and the crackle of firewood. Bank sat alone, staring at the flames. Her heart was a battlefield. Every thought told her she should hate Gideon, fear him, plot her escape, dream of freedom. But her heart, it betrayed her. Every beat whispered his name. Gideon approached silently, his shadow stretching across the fire. He lowered himself beside her, not too close, but close enough that she felt his warmth. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Bank broke the silence. Her voice was soft, trembling. "You know what they say about you?" He didn't look at her. "I've heard it all. Phantom, devil, beast." She turned her head, studying him. "And yet, sitting here, you don't feel like any of those things. You feel human." That word struck him harder than any bullet ever had. His jaw tightened, his throat worked, and for a moment, Bank thought he would stand and walk away. But instead, he whispered, "Human? No one has called me that in years." Her chest ached. She saw him differently now. Not just a man with a gun, but a man carrying invisible chains heavier than the ones that once bound her wrists. "Tell me," she pressed gently. "Why do you do it? Why this life?" He shook his head. "You wouldn't understand." "Then make me understand." His eyes, dark and unreadable, finally met hers. In that moment, she felt like he was peeling open a wound he had hidden for years. "I was born into violence," he said quietly. "My father was killed in front of me. My mother sold to traffickers. By the time I was 10, I was already holding a gun. The world made me a monster before I even knew what love was." Her hand trembled, but she reached out anyway. She placed it lightly on his arm. His muscles tensed, but he didn't pull away. "You're not a monster," she whispered. His breath hitched. No one had ever said those words to him before. The silence stretched. Their eyes locked, and Bank felt a magnetic pull, something terrifying but undeniable. Then, almost against her will, the words slipped from her lips. "I don't know why, but I don't want to hate you anymore." Gideon froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. He had stared death in the face countless times, but never had he felt fear like this, the fear of wanting something pure when his hands were stained with blood. Slowly, almost painfully, he reached up and brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. His hand lingered near her cheek, trembling as though it had forgotten how to be gentle. "Bank," he breathed. Her name was a prayer on his lips. And for the first time, the phantom's voice cracked. But just as the moment thickened, a sharp whistle pierced the night. One of the guards. "Boss!" a voice hissed from the trees. "We've got movement, soldiers nearby." Gideon pulled back instantly, his hand dropping, his eyes returning to steel. But Bank had seen it. She had felt it. Her heart was racing. As Gideon barked orders to his men, preparing to move deeper into the forest, Bank realized something terrifying. The soldiers were her chance at freedom. If they found her, she could go home. Her father would be waiting. Her old life would return. But instead of relief, her chest tightened with dread. Because freedom meant leaving Gideon behind. And she didn't know if she wanted that anymore. That night, as they hurried through the forest, she walked close beside him. In the shadows, when no one was looking, their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. They didn't need words. The truth had already been spoken in silence. Bank's heart had shifted. And Gideon's had too. But love in captivity was a dangerous thing. And danger was closing in. The forest was alive with tension. Twigs cracked under hurried boots. Voices echoed faintly in the distance. The soldiers were closing in. Gideon's men grew restless. "Boss, we can't stay here. If they catch us, we're finished." "Quiet," Gideon snapped, his eyes darting through the trees. His voice was calm, but his grip on the rifle was white-knuckled. Bank walked just behind him, her heart pounding. Every step brought her closer to freedom, and further from him. The thought burned like fire in her chest. They reached a clearing where the moonlight spilled silver across the ground. Gideon signaled for his men to scatter into formation. One of them muttered, "This is it. We're surrounded." Gideon's sharp eyes turned to Bank. She was panting, exhausted, her silk blouse torn from branches, her hair tangled. Yet in that moment, she looked at him not with fear, but with trust. It broke him. He leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Listen to me, Bank. If the soldiers find you, don't tell them I treated you differently. Don't defend me. Do you understand?" Her lips trembled. "Why?" "Because if you do, they'll kill you too." Her breath caught. Tears stung her eyes. "And what about you?" A flicker of pain crossed his face. "Me. I've been dead a long time." Gunfire erupted in the distance. The soldiers had found their trail. Gideon's men panicked, some fleeing deeper into the bush, others firing wildly. The night exploded with chaos. Bank crouched low, her ears ringing, but all she could see was Gideon, the phantom, the feared outlaw, standing firm, protecting her with every calculated move. "Stay down," he barked, his arm shielding her as bullets tore through the trees. One of his men fell. Another dropped his weapon and ran. The circle was collapsing fast. Bank grabbed his arm, desperate. "Gideon, stop. Run with me. Leave this life. You don't have to die here." For the first time, the unshakable man faltered. He looked at her, his eyes wide, as if her words had struck straight through his armor. "Run with you," he whispered. "Yes," she cried. "You're not who they say you are. You're more. I see it. Let me show you a different life." The soldiers' shouts grew louder. The net was closing. Gideon clenched his jaw, torn between two worlds, the blood-soaked path that had defined him and the fragile thread of hope in Bank's voice. In that moment, he made his choice. He seized her hand, pulling her to her feet. "Then we run together." Bank's heart leapt. For the first time since her captivity began, she wasn't running from him. She was running with him. Through the chaos, through the smoke, Through the gunfire that lit up the night, they fled side by side. His grip on her hand was unbreakable, her tears streaming as branches lashed against her skin. Behind them, the soldiers' voices thundered. "Don't let the phantom escape!" But Bank wasn't thinking of the soldiers. She wasn't even thinking of her father, her wealth, her old life. She was thinking of Gideon, the man who had stolen her freedom but somehow, impossibly, given her heart back to her. They reached a hidden ravine where the river roared below. Gideon pulled her close, both of them gasping for air. "From here," he said hoarsely, "there's no turning back. If we jump, we disappear. But it means leaving everything behind." Bank's pulse pounded. Behind them, the soldiers drew nearer. She looked at him, her captor turned protector, the man the world feared but she now loved. Her choice was clear. With tears shining in her eyes, she whispered, "Then let's disappear." Together, they leapt into the darkness. The water swallowed them whole.